Imagine you are an American on a visit to Ireland. You've been out all day enjoying the nature and the scenery, walking around a lovely lake lined with holly trees and bramble, and suddenly you realize you no longer have your bag with you, your important travel bag with all your money and your passport in it. In a panic, you search the footpath around you. Where could it have gone? Then you remember, the bench by the lake where you stopped to feed the ducks. You set it down by the bench. You race back to the spot, only to find the bench empty. After a bit more time spent in futile search, you realize that someone must have taken it. You do the most sensible thing you can think of. Go to the authorities. You head to the nearest police station, or the guards as they're called in Ireland. You walk inside and, in a businesslike way, trying to hide your panic at just having lost your passport, you tell the guard behind the counter that you'd like to report your missing bag. He smiles and greets you and, having noticed your accent, comments that you're not from around here and asks where you're from. From America. Sure, I thought so, he replies. And what brings you to Ireland? You're not sure this conversation is entirely relevant to the point at hand, so you answer briefly before again mentioning that you lost your bag in Killikeen Park. Killikeen, sure, that's a lovely spot, the guard agrees, good-naturedly. And before you know it, you're listening to a childhood story about a visit to the lake with his granddad while you wonder with frustration whether he's ever going to take your plight seriously. Cultivating a Global Worldview. I'm your host, Kalina, and today I will be discussing how different cultures emphasize different values. This doesn't mean that in some societies, children are taught that murder is right and good, but helping a friend in need is a crime. No, moral issues are more universal than that. When it comes to morality, most cultures around the world have a similar set of core beliefs regarding right and wrong. The golden rule applies pretty much everywhere. I'm also not referring to governments corrupted by power-hungry individuals who promote immoral behavior to achieve their own ends, as these actions do not necessarily reflect the values held by the people in those cultures. These kind of moral issues are a topic for another day. No, I'm talking about values, the things we teach our children, the concepts and ideals that are important in society. Things like community, respect, freedom, friendliness, personal achievement, patriotism, valor, unity, efficiency, and many, many more. Most cultures around the world share a similar set of values. Values are, after all, good things. But each culture also emphasizes certain values over others. If you were participating in a team meeting in Japan, for example, planning a project as a group would look quite different from a similar meeting in America. In the Japanese group, you might see a couple of people put forth ideas, but once the team is moving in a particular direction, no one will express an opinion that contradicts the team's general consensus. In an American team, each member is expected to voice their own opinion, and to even argue why his or her idea is better than others. Both teams can successfully reach the end goal and complete the project, but they will go about it in different ways. The Japanese value group unity and harmony, and set their own opinions aside in favor of maintaining that harmony. Americans value individuality and personal expression, and they encourage every voice to be heard before a decision is made. Both values are good, and both are even considered good in both countries, but one is emphasized over the other. This can cause discomfort or embarrassment for someone traveling or living in another culture because people's behavior can be quite unexpected. Values are things we teach our children from a young age, so it can be hard to see past them. It's difficult for anyone to separate their long-held personal values from morals and to accept that an opposite behavior might also be showing good values. When I was a very young mother with 3 tiny boys, I lived for 2 years in Moldova, an ex-Soviet country in Eastern Europe. It was often difficult for me to travel around the city, pushing my double stroller and dragging my 3-year-old by the hand, maneuvering through the marketplaces and bustling all the little ones onto crowded trolley buses. But I often had a source of unexpected help. The babushkas. These are the grandmothers of Moldova. These plump old ladies with their colorful scarves wrapped around their heads, their sensible skirts and shoes, and their large market bags. They are very interfering. They would yell at me when my baby fell asleep in the stroller for fear that the wind would blow through his ears and he'd get sick, or they would spit on my kids for good luck as we passed them in the park. In the winter, they would scold me if my kids' pants hiked up a little at the ankle while we were on the bus and some bare skin showed. I eventually learned to buy my boys woolen tights to wear under their pants like the Moldovan kids did. But the babushkas were also well-meaning and even helpful. They would take my kids on their laps in a packed bus when there was nowhere for me to sit. And they always had little oranges and chocolates in their purses for them. Now, as a child, I was taught very strictly, don't take candy from strangers. This idea is instilled in American children at an early age, so that we grow up with this vague fear that we'll be snatched and thrown in the back of a van and never see our parents again if we so much as reach out to take that dreadful piece of candy from an unknown stranger. So, when a babushka took my 2-year-old on her knee on a crowded trolley bus and offered him a sweet from her oversized purse, my first instinct was to warn my child, no, don't take candy from strangers. Imagine my surprise, then, when I witnessed a young Moldovan mother in a similar situation. Her daughter was offered a chocolate from an elderly babushka's purse. The child, uninterested in the candy and feeling shy around this woman she didn't know, shook her head and tried to refuse the offer. Her mother immediately scolded her, saying, "Don't be rude. You take that candy and say thank you." I watched this scene in fascination as I began to realize that my ingrained notions about stranger danger were not universal and did not apply here. It was actually considered rude for children to refuse candy from strangers. So why this difference? What was the value conflict here? As Americans, we teach our children to be wary around strangers as a means of keeping them safe from potential predators. Child safety is a value we emphasize. In Moldova, life is hard and the elderly have lived through most of it. The babushkas have earned respect in their society because they have struggled through life's difficulties and survived. Most are widows because the women generally far outlive the men in that country, and most are poor because few job opportunities are available to them. They have already raised their children, and they take it upon themselves to help the young mothers they see around them, which includes offering sweets to their children. It is rude for the children or the mothers not to accept this offering, for that is not showing the babushkas the respect they deserve. Respect for elders is a value Moldovans emphasize. Now, does this mean that Americans don't value respect for elders? Or that Moldovans don't value child safety? Of course not. But in certain situations, such as teaching children whether or not to take candy from strangers, one value is emphasized over another. Moldovans don't see taking a chocolate from an old lady as dangerous, and Americans don't see a refusal to accept candy from a stranger as rude. Neither approach is wrong. It simply shows ways in which people within a culture display which values are more important to them. When we travel to other countries, particularly if we plan to stay for a length of time, it is important to learn to hold our own values in an open hand. We must understand that the things we were taught as children, such as don't take candy from strangers or speak up and express your opinions, are not the only right way to do things. People in other cultures do things differently, not necessarily because they disagree with the things you value, but because they emphasize other equally good values. While living in Moldova, I had to learn to dress my boys in woolen tights in the winter, to respect the advice of the babushkas, And I learned to teach my children to accept sweets from strangers. I had to learn the value of the values they taught. This is critical to understanding and functioning well in another culture. And losing your bag in Ireland? That story actually happened to me too. I did eventually get my bag back. Someone had already turned it into the guards, and they had it there at the station. I simply had to look past my frustration that my personal value of efficiency was being set aside for the Irish value of friendliness. The guard had every intention of getting my bag back for me, but he also wanted our encounter to be a pleasant and friendly one, a value I have to agree was worthwhile. If you enjoyed this podcast, check out my website at myglobalworldview.wordpress.com for more about traveling, cross-cultural interactions, and developing a global worldview. Thanks for listening.